everybody, Textile here. So I thought I'd talk about the RC51 and why it absolutely sucks to insure one in Ontario. Now, I'm going to go back a little bit and talk about the fact that I've been riding motorcycles for almost 30 years. Never had a claim, never had a ticket. And you would think I'd be like the perfect person they'd want to insure a bike. However, in Ontario, they base the insurance basically on what type of wheels you want to ride. So if I want to drive a full-decker Harley with $60,000 worth of accessories and whatnot on it, it actually would be cheaper to insure than this. So I'm just going to get on her and go for a bit of a ride so I can at least enjoy riding it while I rant. Just a little bit of back history here. Back in December, I got a bill from my insurance company, and they let me know that my insurance rate were going up a little bit. Now, this bike isn't cheap to insure. It's classed as what's called a super sport bike, which basically means you take a bunch of bunnies and grind them up and feed them to them because they're the most evil thing on the planet. And on a whole, prior to the company I was with, it cost about $1,000 a year, give or take, to insure this bike. And that was just for liability. That was no fire and theft or collision. Well, what happened was the insurance company I was with for about 3 years suddenly got bought out by another company. And I'd swear without a lie that this company decided they had to make back their investment in the first 6 months. My insurance bill went from $1,100 a year to $1,885. Yeah, you would think I would be a little upset over that, and you were correct. I went immediately to my insurance company because luckily they only live about a block and a half from where I live, and complained in person, and then they phoned me back and I complained on the phone, and they did a bunch of research and they said, well, that's the going rate for this thing. I know we're not as competitive as some people. And I went like, competitive? You're not even in the business. So I ended up going back with the company I used to be with prior to this insurance company. The main reason I had switched over to the company that I had the problem with was because I live in an old house, and old homes are on the insurance hit list for screwing people over as well now lately. So I went back to the company I was with before, and it ended up costing me a little bit more than what I had been with them previously. But the interesting part was I'm now paying $1,100 a year, actually slightly under, which was what I was paying prior to the increase in the rates. But this bike also now has fire, theft, and collision on it, which I've actually never had on a motorcycle because it's always been so stupid expensive. I could never really afford to pay for it. So I had a long conversation with a couple insurance companies over this, and my biggest pet peeve is that the insurance company, literally, I think they just go through the latest motorcycle catalogs or brochures and just look at them and go, evil, good, and that's how they classify their motorcycles. Because this particular bike is classed as what's called a super sport bike, which is like even worse than a regular sport bike. And because of that, you have to pay a higher premium. And I can't even imagine what a 20-something-year-old person's going to pay if they wanted to insure this motorcycle. Because the interesting thing is, these bikes never fall off the list. So bikes from the 80s and 90s that were put on that list, which are essentially rolling antiques, and I wouldn't call real performance bike by today's standard, these owners still pay a high premium. Where the interesting part is, like this Honda CBR 600, which this year I think makes 2 horsepower less than this particular bike, is not on the list. So a 600cc bike is not considered a super sport bike because it's not 1000cc, but it makes almost as much horsepower as this 1000cc bike, and makes almost 20 horsepower more than a a late 90s 1000cc bike. And I basically ranted on them about that, and they sort of went, oh yeah, well, we look at our stuff all the time, blah blah blah. And it's like, I've been doing this dance for literally 30 years. Just to give you an idea, my wife, when she started riding, her first bike was this one here, which is a CBX 250. Now the CBX 250 was essentially a Honda XL 250 single cylinder engine put into a different frame and given the CBX name because it sounded cool, because the CBXs were like really cool bikes back in the early 80s. It's not a sport bike. It's not even remotely a sport bike. It's like putting a fancy paint job on an old Dodge. It looks the part, but it is not the part at all. Like I remember taking it to the place we were going to store it for the winter, because at the time we didn't have a proper garage. And at the time I was racing bikes. I was racing 250 GB bikes. So the light would go green and I got on the gas as hard as I physically could. And I swear that bike couldn't pull a fart out of the butt of a fly. That's how low powered it was. But the insurance company quoted her $1,500. Now this is back about like about 1994, 1995. So $1,500 for a motorcycle that cost her $1,300. So what happened was, she ended up selling that bike and bought at the time, a Honda 500 Chattel. So she bought a bike that was actually larger, faster, and more powerful, but because it was considered to be a cruiser and not a sport bike, the insurance was a little over $400 a year versus $1,500. And that's pretty much right then and there when I realized that insurance companies are basically the spawn of Satan, because they have obviously no brain matter at all on how they analyze stuff, and I pretty well lost all respect for them. Doesn't mean there's not nice people working there, but I just mean it's, I really feel sorry for young riders, because there's a lot of really nice motorcycles out there that are not necessarily brand new, but are very nice bikes to ride, and I can't even imagine how you people could even afford to ride them. It's bad enough with buying a bike and then having to get a good helmet and all the gear that you need to go with it, but then it just be literally bent over by the insurance company before you even leave the driveway. I just find it obscene, and I absolutely give you guys and girls credit for still even putting up with all this junk. So anyways, that's my my rant. Hope you enjoyed it. I know most of you probably agree with it, so talk to you later.